think we should be.
There we are.
We are live. All right,
Yay.
great. Let me just set in the chat. Okay. I don't know if is anyone watching yet. Let me just post the link back in the chat.
Yeah, and probably on the Facebook.
Yeah, I have it on the face. The problem with the Facebook one is that because I'm not an admin, it doesn't go up to the start. But I posted it in there. So if you guys want to,
wait. So where is the chat? Is it not the upper left corner?
It is the chat room for all the people watching is. I'll post the link right here. All right, we have 6 viewers. All right, great. All right, hello everyone. So we're going to be doing the discussion today. I'll do a quick intro of everyone. I'm Cullen. I'm just filling in for Hillary today. And Clark, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hey everybody, my name's Clark, and I've been involved with the class since it went live. Fan of Herzog's for a while. For quite a while, so I was really excited about the class, and yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation this afternoon or morning or whatever time it is where everybody is.
Yeah. All right, Alex, do you want to do an intro?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone. So yeah, I started the class when it started, but got a little bit behind. So I'm trying to really get into it now and get caught up with everything, and really make a concerted effort to be one of Herzog's disciples and get the most out of this class.
All right, great. So just for everyone watching, just because we did have some technical difficulties, we'll probably go about 10 minutes past the hour, if that's all right with everyone. But let's just jump into it then. So the first thing we're going to do is the lesson review. That should last about half an hour. So we're going to be reviewing lesson 13 and 14 today. 13 is working with actors and creating the character. So the first part of that is that Werner shares techniques with posture, wardrobe, props, and creating characters with Klaus Kinski and Nicolas Cage. Discuss how these subtle characteristics add up into larger characters. So anyone who wants to just talk about that, you guys can jump in if you want to start off the conversation.
Yeah, I find it so interesting of just that, that slant shoulder, what it added to his character, and like head forward in Bad Lieutenant. Because Nicolas Cage is such an interesting actor, because with the right director, like aimed in the right direction, that guy can just provide such an amazing performance, or it can be ghostwriting. But
which has its own charms, by the way.
Yeah.
Let's not dismiss that entirely.
I know. I saw both of them in theaters. I'll admit, not proudly, but just what you can get out of somebody like that with just like the kind of right, and that idea of what did he say, like, embrace the madness, or embrace like the spirit of being a bad person. It adds so much. I was working with an actor on this little stage thing we were doing, and he kind of was struggling with his character. It was like a sketch that we were doing, and he was struggling with his character, trying to find something funny out of it. And I gave him these dumb glasses, kind of like Clark Kent looking Superman glasses, and he built this whole character out of chewing on the edge of the glasses and finding these moments to put them on. And he found this whole person that prior he was kind of struggling to even remember his lines, and then now he's got this persona with this little tick of just when to take off his glasses and chew on the end of them and think like, what is this, like, where am I going with this? And it really brought a lot of life to it, and it was something where I was like trying to think what would Herzog do, and we found it. We found that moment, found those glasses, and it set that whole scene alight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one of the things that comes into my mind is interesting. I think Herzog is really good at this. And I think it's important in today's day and age with film and television, that ultimately we're talking about storytelling in a visual medium. And I think, kind of we're moving into a place where more and more, in this like second golden age of television or whatever they call it, where it's like storytelling, I think people are utilizing that less and less and less, the visual aspect of storytelling. And it's a lot of exposition and dialogue, this kind of stuff that we really see on television. I think that really embracing posture, wardrobe, props, is really utilizing to the fullest extent telling the character of the story through the visual medium. You have all of these aspects to utilize moving pictures to tell a story. And I think sometimes that gets lost, a little bit. And so I think it falls kind of into this larger thing that is, you've really got this extraordinary opportunity to tell so much of your story, of your character, or what, just in its entirety through the visual medium. And clearly these things are part of that. And sometimes it's easy to get that lost. I think sometimes it's, we're used to watching so much TV now where you've just got talking heads kind of telling us what's going on. And I think it's fun as an audience member to notice these things and put these things together in your own mind, and interpret these different things, a character's posture, their wardrobe, props, these kind of things. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think actually, Alex, you brought up an interesting point about the props with the glasses, or if that counts as props or wardrobe. But I went to the high school that I went to was an arts high school, so you had to audition to get in and all that. And I went for the drama program. And I remember one time, if anyone knows Tennessee Williams, we were doing Summer and Smoke, which is one of his older plays. And I couldn't, for some reason, I couldn't get the physicality of John, who I was playing John, and I couldn't get the physicality of the character down. And so what I did was I got, my grandpa had this old Zippo lighter. And so I just got the Zippo lighter and I started playing with it. And I realized, like, okay, well, that kind of, for some reason, gets me in character more. And I found that was something that maybe the character would do. So I just started playing with the Zippo lighter constantly. And it just kind of became something in the character, and it helped me act. So it's kind of weird how something as simple as like a little prop can really throw so much more into a character and get you thinking about, like, what does the prop mean to them? But even just, it says a lot to know what a person does when they've got nothing else to do. I think that's something that's really interesting about just character work in general, is when you allow actors to kind of, like, you just make them sit there for a bit. And I feel like that's the time that you almost understand the character the most, because you're just kind of sitting there alone. And that's what most people experience 90% of the time, is just kind of sitting there and doing their own thing. And I think that's when you really understand a character, is doing kind of their neutral state.
Yeah, when they're stuck with that quiet moment, like, what do they revert to? Like, you really have to, like, that's when you get it stuck in the head. Like, you can say the line a million times, but, until you kind of, like, are quiet and thinking the line, or thinking the reason you would say that, that's when you start to internalize and really build something.
I'll just weave in some of the comments from the chat room here. So F. Sickles said, for 3 productions, I told one of my actors his fly was down every 5th rehearsal. Really provided the vulnerability his character needed. That's pretty funny. And then also he said that scents help with, like, scent as in smell, helps with the character too. He used vanilla for the production of The Hunchback, which is actually kind of interesting, because you don't really think about it, but like, human sense of smell is very it's very much in line with our memory. And, like, you'll notice that sometimes when you walk into a house, like a friend's house or a relative's house or something, and you smell it, and it's like, oh, well, now I can remember so much that happened in this house just because of the smell. So that's actually kind of interesting that you would use scent like that.
Just I even just thinking of, like, my childhood best friend, the first thing that came to mind is how his house smelled. It always smelled like laundry. And I clean laundry. It always smelled like, kind of the dryer running. And I have this, like, very, and then of course the flood of memories come back of that. But I'm kind of interested, F. Sickles, how did you use vanilla? That's
like, Was it at certain times? Was it like for a specific moment, or was it? Yeah, I'm really curious too.
Audience, or just for the characters?
Yeah, that's something that's quite interesting. And he says, oh, all right, I think he's responding. But that kind of makes me think of so much that I remember Werner Herzog talking about how he doesn't like Lee Strasberg.
Yeah.
And he thought that when Brando went to Strasbourg, that his acting almost went down. That's really interesting. Yeah, exactly. And that's interesting because when the high school that I went to, we actually studied a lot of we had this whole unit called Great Acting Teachers, where we went through Uta Hagen and Lee Strasberg and a whole bunch of like those old acting teachers that taught so many of these famous movie stars. And I remember kind of thinking that before I even knew Herzog's opinion on it, I remember thinking that it was kind of interesting how a lot of Brando's, at least his really groundbreaking performances, they didn't really have much to do with what he learned from Strasberg. They all had to do with what he had already with him.
Right.
And it was oftentimes it was either the directors that he was working with that got these things out of him. And I remember getting into an argument with my drama teacher because he kept saying, oh no, a lot of what Strasberg taught him, I'm sure that he learned things from Strasberg, but I remember it's just kind of interesting how, because Strasberg of course invented pretty much method acting. And so there's a really fine line, I think, between almost taking it too far and doing something like what F. Sickles says here about the vanilla. I think that's something that subtly will work better than a lot of other things that, for example, what Lee Strasberg taught, like Mr. Herzog was saying.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, Alex, please.
Oh no, go right ahead.
I was just going to say that's a really interesting topic. I mean, you could, and people do. You could talk about this for weeks and months and months and months, and about acting technique and acting teachers and supposed gurus and method from Stanislavski to Strasberg and Uta Hagen and Adler and all of these, these acting gurus, these pillars. I mean, that's a whole other, it's very interesting. And I think for almost every different type of actor, you're probably going to have a different type of approach.
Yeah.
I think that, certainly it is really this alchemy that's interesting. Herzog talks time and time again about really understanding the heart of men and of humans, of all of us, really understanding the hearts of humans. And really, because I think that when you're steeped in a lot of technical study with acting, that can, for some people, create a lot of artifice and a lot of self-consciousness. Not for everybody, but for some people. And clearly in Herzog's work, he's really trying to get past all that. I mean, he really wants to get past the polish. He wants to get past the pre-planned and canned and thought out and prepared. He's really going for his ecstatic truth in a performance. And so I can certainly see where for him, that would be his perspective. I tend to agree with him quite a bit on it, but it's interesting.
It falls into that old saying of, being educated beyond your own intelligence. And, you put all of these things into your head, you try to fall back on all of this education, but really what it comes down to is like with the vanilla, like that's primal human instinct. That's brain chemistry working. And if that works for you, forget all of the, the things you learned, or at least push them to the side and just really find that primal, that humanity in that character. And I think that's really interesting. And I feel like that's a running theme with Herzog is, you can prepare, you can have all of this educated insight, and like you were saying about how he doesn't even really watch that many movies. You can have all of this, you can come into it with, the most film education possible, the most critical studies, possible, but really just falling on those gut instincts and what is really human won't fail you.
Well, I think, oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
Well, I was just going to, previous to going live, we were kind of talking about this like snake eating its own tail kind of thing with the Marvel music, the scores in Marvel movies, and how there's this really brilliant, maybe we can post this link somewhere, there's this really brilliant YouTube video that that kind of discusses how directors will use pre-existing scores as temp tracks. And then the composers of the actual scores for these films, using those temp tracks that the director has fallen in love with, will create just a slight, just a tiny variation, but it's almost an identical piece of music. And they keep doing this and doing this and doing this through iteration and iteration and generation of film. So sometimes I think that on one end, I mean, we're cinephiles to some extent. We love film, and so all of us here probably watch quite a few, but there is certainly this danger of being so steeped conceptually, intellectually in reading books about films, watching films, talking about films, and it's all kind of from here, this conceptualization, that sometimes we may be taking ourselves away from an ability to execute from the gut or from the heart sometimes, maybe, or that we end up kind of regurgitating so much of what we've already seen and heard without even knowing it, So sometimes that kind of overanalysis or pre-thinking or something can inhibit.
Yeah. And I think I'll post those links in after the stream is over, just so people don't have to keep up with them, so they don't have to watch them while we're talking. But I think one of the other things that Herzog said that really sort of got me was when he talked about rehearsal and rehearsal process, and how he finds when people say the lines too much that they almost lose meaning, and that oftentimes the first take can very well be the best take. And I think about that a lot when I'm working with people and actors. Mostly because I find that the first thing that you usually say when you do a first take is the most natural one that comes to you. And it's the one that's kind of, you don't think about it, you just kind of do it. And then it's not until the second and third and fourth takes that you almost put this artificial kind of thought into it. That's like, oh, well, what if I try it this way? What if I try it this way? But then when it comes down to it, the first way you tried it is how you naturally reacted to that situation. So I think that in Herzog, I can't remember I think it was Bad Lieutenant where he said, or was it, I can't remember which movie he was talking about, where he said that he did 3 or 4 takes of a shot, but then just ended up using the first one anyway because it was the best take. And I think that that's something that happens a lot. But on the contrary, you can have something that goes the complete other end, where it's something like Kubrick, who did up to like 80 takes of a shot, drove his actors insane, but then got completely different performances out of that, and it was more of the stress and the strain that he put on his actors that got those performances out of them. So it's like it's kind of two sides of the same coin, though, and it goes from, you have so many people who will direct a scene and they'll do 13 takes, they'll do 10 takes, and then they'll use the 9th, and it's just, by that point it's so tired out. And that's one of the hard things about live acting, like in terms of theater and more on the stage, is that you can't take that first take, because if you rehearse, it's not like you can perfectly replicate your first rehearsal ever again. And that's why I do agree with Herzog in the terms of that his rehearsals are kind of, they start when the movie is filming, because that way you get that first kind of primal natural take.
Right.
You got to read F. Sickles' latest comment.
Oh, it is? Okay, let's see.
I don't like actors or acting. It drives me nuts and ruins my week.
That's pretty funny. Actually, I'll weave in some of them more, because there's been a couple. Let's see. Alberta G says, zero experience with actors. Actually, my very short experience is related to documentaries, and I actually think I will stay like this, but it's interesting to listen to other people's experience. I actually think that there is a connection between documentary, like in terms of interviews and that real raw stuff, and acting in a way. There's a strange kind of film connection, and I think it comes from just like we were saying earlier, that natural instinct, that the first instinct that you get as an actor, oftentimes that almost can be as real as conducting an interview for a documentary.
Yeah.
And I find that, and again, sort of on the flip side, I find that sometimes you'll see documentaries where what the person being interviewed is saying sounds so scripted and it sounds so fake, and
Right.
it just kind of ruins it.
You don't want the subject to be too prepared and then come off like trying to, you know, basically read from a script in their brain of like finding these moments and telling the story and, you know, building their own character. I mean, there's kind of tangentially on topic, but there's like an interesting Chuck Klosterman essay where he's obsessed with the real world and the MTV show, and he gets into this like kind of breakdown of how, you know, when it first started, the first season or two, it was real people in a real house and just kind of living together, but it quickly mutated into becoming these characters and people finding these roles that they were going to fulfill on the show. Like there had to be the outspoken this guy and the like I don't give a, you know, F, like kind of like drunk guy, like party dude, and like these people kind of like fell into these roles and it stopped being reality whatsoever, even though it was like one of the first reality TV shows. It stopped being a documentary. It started being people finding these characters and trying to build these personas.
Improvised.
Yeah,
acting,
exactly.
Yeah.
So they come in with like a, you know, a preconceived notion of their character, and then they're just playing it out, and, you know, to some degree the producers egg that on because that's what works with television. But you know, it loses that edge of being anything close to being a reality show, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, we spoke about this a bit in the last live stream we did last week, but I think. Again, just because even though we're kind of on a documentary almost tangent for a bit, but that's okay. But talking about Herzog, how he conducts his interviews, how he doesn't talk to the person beforehand, and he just kind of the first time that they're saying the information is on camera. And I think that is something that anybody who wants to make documentaries can really take away from, because that gives you the most realistic response, as opposed to going through the information with the person beforehand and then saying, okay, now just repeat all that to the camera now.
Yeah.
I find that gives a very forced response. But so we can probably go on to part B of lesson A, which is kind of related, which is, what is the director's role in helping actors embody their characters? You guys can start that conversation as well.
Well, I think that, you know, starting at a higher, more generic level, you know, I think the most important role that a director plays when working with actors is that you are basically their first audience. You are the first person witnessing their performance, so to speak. And so, of course, naturally, then that means that you're there to be a catalyst for their greatest work. You are there to set an environment on set, or, you know, from beginning to end, actually, to help get the absolute best performance for the story you possibly can. So, I mean, in the most generic sense, that's your goal when you work with actors now. And then every scenario, every situation, what you do to get there is going to be different from actor to actor and from set to set. There's going to be a lot of different tactics that a person can take or strategies they can use to get there. But ultimately, I mean, at least me, I always feel like you're there to service the story as a director in its entirety, but so much of that is through the actors, of course. It's vital. So from casting on, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that also the director can play a really interesting role in almost being a third eye in the scene and being able to kind of report that to the actor.
That's exactly right. You're their first audience. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. I think that's something that's also really important to have a healthy discussion about with an actor also, because oftentimes an actor will have a totally like they'll build up their character and they'll read the script for the first time. They'll go, I know exactly how I'm going to do this scene. I'm going to deliver that line that way. And then as soon as they get in front of people, it changes, and it can be completely for a reason that the actor doesn't even realize. But I think that having that healthy relationship again between directors and actors, and allowing them to go for it and just do anything that they feel the character should do in that situation. I mean, I'm sure Nicolas Cage, as we were talking about earlier, I'm sure he does some pretty wild things on set that oftentimes, unfortunately, might not even make it into movies.
Yeah.
But I think that it's important to let an actor, do those things, because I think that when it gets down to it, the actor is the character, really.
There's no character. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And I think I don't know, I don't know if we want to try to kind of bring it into the experience that most of the people are going to be having in this class. Most of the people in this class are first time or near first time. They're in the beginning of their filmmaking careers. And, I don't know if we want to kind of tailor this conversation to this, but, probably are going to be working with actors who are on the less experienced, side of the bell curve or spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we want to kind of talk about what might be most applicable to directors in this class, but or people's experiences, specific experiences, if you guys have had any, working with actors in your projects or etc. But
well, I would say the advice that I would give to somebody who is starting out in this, and I mean, I'm technically still starting out in terms of actually getting onto a professional level, but I think that you're going to have times when you're filming something and your actor is just amazing, and you're sitting there kind of in awe of what they're doing, and you're like, well, I couldn't even think of this, and you'll be totally awestruck. But then you're also going to have times where you can have a perfectly competent actor, but they're just not giving you the performance that you envisioned. And then there's that question of like, well, what do I do now? Do I either get someone new, or do I try and roll with this, or do I have a conversation with them? And I guess we can talk on that as well, because that's kind of something that is it's something that comes up a lot, that is always kind of an awkward situation, because you don't really know what to do when you have an actor and they're not really going directly with your vision. And sometimes it can be very good. Sometimes you can think like, I couldn't have imagined this any better, or sometimes it can be more
totally
tone. Yeah, exactly.
And I think, I don't know, what I try to do, I'll speak from my personal experience, and on my better days, I'm good at this, and sometimes I'm not, it's certainly a work in progress, but I really try to, I start out, obviously, casting is so key. But we're all limited to the practicalities of where we're at. Herzog may have his choice of actors for the lead role. You know what I mean? Most of us are not, I mean, you're going to be working with extremely limited budgets. You don't have a name, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're going to be getting the best that you can get. You're going to be trying to make that match as best as you can. But certainly still there's a tremendous amount you can do there. But I mean, again, just to reiterate, in the beginning, casting is so key. But, from there, I always try my hope and goal is that the actors that you cast are going to bring more to it than you could have ever imagined. Mm-hmm. Whatever you wrote on the page, whatever you've envisioned in your mind, they're going to broaden that. They're going to add to that. They're going to bring things that's the whole point. They're otherwise just they're props if they're not bringing something extra to it, right? So honor their art and craft, and start out really giving them the broadest possible scope imaginable to bring what they're going to bring to the role. And then from there, I try to ask questions instead of tell, right? So so you're asking questions to try to like shape a person into the needs of the story by asking questions and letting them do that work. And then God forbid, if you get to the point where you're doing line readings, I think you're probably really in trouble. But that kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think F. Sickles made a really good point here too about he mentioned that when he had his Stanley and Streetcar Named Desire read a few essays about the nature of bullshit and not taking it, and during the creating of his character, and I think that's something that's also, it kind of goes in line with your asking questions as opposed to telling, where it's you give your actors resources that have relation to the character, and then they are able to read and they're able to draw their own conclusions on the character, as opposed to you sitting there and going, well, this is how he would react to this situation, this situation,
Absolutely.
this situation. Yeah.
Absolutely. You can point to inspirations, and that can be poetry, literature, other films, painting, But yeah, I really feel like if you're getting into the point where you're like, okay, you basically, if you're giving line readings to an actor, I think you're really doing what they can bring to the work of disservice. Obviously, now, having said that, though, look, there's sometimes when the film's got to get made and you're burning through money on set. And sometimes, I mean, I've had to resort to it, sadly, but you always want to try to be at the absolute, allow the actor to bring as much as humanly possible. And, and again, it's like different actors are going to, one of the things that I see so much and I think this is probably the case at any level, is at any level of actor, is that one of the things that you really have to work against is an actor's fear of really being as vulnerable as possible and opening up and bringing as much of themselves as humanly possible, warts and all, to the character. And I think we all really, I feel like, so you said, well, what's a director? I think a director creating an environment where an actor can be their absolute most vulnerable and real and authentic. And every person is going to require a different kind of, some people look for conflict, and you kind of have, like Kinski with Herzog, and you have to get right at, you have to kind of, they look for conflict, and there's something, they're testing you as a director, and you have to kind of give that back to them in a certain way, and it works. Other people need to be held and, kind of, metaphorically, like held and comforted. And, every different personality is going to have it. You have to kind of be a psychiatrist or a you really have to kind of understand psychology. And, I think the way Werner says it is the best. You really have to understand the heart of people. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that also raising the stakes is a big one as well. And that's something that you'll always hear actors talking about, but is raising, like, if you have a situation, say you're writing a script or something, or even you can do this on set as well. Always try and ask yourself the question of, how can the stakes be any higher in this situation? Like, what can I do to make the stakes for this character just elevate them and get them to the maximum possible level, within reason, of course. I mean, you don't want to go crazy with it, but and I think that that's something that can get really good performances out of an actor, is you have that conversation with them. If you're sitting down and you say, like, what are your stakes in this situation, and like, what's your will, what's your final objective, and what do you want out of this scene, and get those nailed down. And as soon as you get those nailed down, you can get really strong performances out of pretty much anyone.
Yeah. I always say, give somebody something to do, not something to act. I don't want anybody acting. I want people doing things.
Yeah.
I don't even know. I mean, I guess it's weird in a way. Like, I've come to a place where I don't even know what acting is. I mean, and I've studied acting more than anything else myself, personally. What is I don't even, I want people doing things, whether it's on a stage or in front of a camera. I don't want any acting, none.
Yeah. So I think we'll go on to lesson 14 now, part B, which is working, because we're kind of segueing into this anyway, which is working with actors on set. Werner talks about domesticating the beast and bringing crazy energy onto the screen with Kinski.
Love it.
How would you work with someone like this? Or I guess, have you ever worked with someone like this? I mean, I know I haven't, and I don't think I ever will, but I think it would be quite fun.
Is there anyone else like this? I mean,
oh my God.
I think he's kind of
unique,
once in a lifetime experience.
Yeah. They broke the mold. Yeah. I mean, I've never worked with anybody like that. I have certainly worked with people. I have worked with very challenging situations, directing people where there were certainly huge obstacles to working with them, and having their work service the story in the way that I wanted. No question. I've had tremendous challenge with people before, but yeah, not like him though.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've got to say the closest I've ever got to working with somebody of the likes of Kinski was not when I was directing, but when I was an actor and the co-star of the play that we were doing, she was just like, we had this funny little feud where I found that the best thing that I could do, and the way I got the best performances, or the way that we got the best performance together, was just if I made her as mad as humanly possible. So I would just do things all day during rehearsals and during anything, just to make her mad and just get on her nerves. And then I remember like eventually it would just click, and I'd say, okay, we can start now, because she's the right amount of anger at me. And it was like this perfect balance of, you really had to get, I couldn't get her too mad or else it wouldn't work, but I had to kind of weasel my way in the middle. And it was kind of funny because it would create these interesting moments of improv, not necessarily line wise, like we would be saying the lines, but we'd be 3 months into rehearsal and we'd still be coming up with things, just because every time I made her angry, she would have this like look at me, and she would just come over and do something else. And it was really interesting because it kind of delved into psychology. We're friends now, so it's all right. But yeah, it was just kind of this funny little situation I had myself in, where it was like, as long as she's angry, we can do it.
Yeah.
Somebody F. Sickles said that his last 4 acting gigs, he hated his characters, drove everyone, me too, nuts, which is pretty funny. Nothing like hating your own character.
Yeah, interesting. What about you, Alex?
I'm trying to think back. I've been lucky to work. Obviously I've had personalities here and there to deal with. But generally I've worked on projects with friends, and, if there's ever been anything difficult, I did work, this was actually, it was bad for the actors. I was acting in a short film a while ago, and the director and cinematographer were clashing the entire time, and their egos were completely out of control, to the point where, it would be, they would walk off the set. They would go and have an argument loud enough that we could hear it. And then they would come back on some level of, compromise. And then they would basically turn to us and be like, okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
And it was such an, unsafe environment that anytime it would just, the actors were kind of looking at each other going like, whoa, all right, let's see what we can do. But it was such a, they were so wrapped up in whatever their egotistical bullshit was, that it was so hard to pull anything out or decide anything. And then when they would give a direction or something, it was still, we were in our own heads of like, well, what was all that about? Like, are they even what is this point? But no, I can't think specifically of just having to deal with just an ego that was so unruly that it disrupted the set, as far as an actor goes.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a really interesting point that I think is worth talking about a little bit, in that when you have an actor, when you have a performer who, and I always think these things stem from insecurities. I think that outrageous behavior stems from an insecurity, which actors really, I think a lot of people that go into the acting profession are kind of more set to have some of these issues than other people anyway, maybe, but I think that all the outrageous behavior tends to come from a place of insecurity and place of fear, because they know that they're going to be required to be really vulnerable in front of people. And I think that that's a challenge for all of us in a way. But, one of the things you got to really kind of keep in mind is that you only have 100% of whatever amount of energy and focus you can give to things, and that you've got to split that between your performers, between your crew, between da-da-da-da-da. Well, when you've got one particular individual or a couple particular individuals starting to take a disproportionately large amount of that focus, now you don't have as much time to give to all these other important roles in your set. And you also have this, you've got morale issues with crew, with other actors, and all this stuff you really do have to be careful. It's like, if you've seen what Burden of Dreams, is that the making of? Yeah. I mean, and you watch Kinski get into it with Herzog or with the other producer, I forget, there's like a scene where he's yelling at one of the producers, just going crazy.
Yeah, just anyone that was near.
And it's like, I think it's like half the crew walks off eventually, or, you've really got to be careful because it can just devastate everybody else on your team. So it's really a tightrope walking kind of situation. It's a real art and science of managing relationships with everyone. And
absolutely.
I think it takes someone like Herzog to work with someone like Kinski.
Yes.
Like, I don't think there are many people in the world who could just wrangle him and actually somehow siphon all that energy into a performance.
There's no question. There's no question. And I think that they sought each other out. I think that Herzog was smart, and that's part of the casting thing. It's not just, does this person have the right type? Does this person have the skills? It's really, I think most of casting actually are our personalities, the director and the actor, are our personalities a match for what I'm trying to do in the story? And then to some extent too, the personalities, of course, of all the actors who are going to be, working together. I think it's so much more about actual personality and are we going to have a chemistry where we can get the best out of each other? Because it's not just that Herzog got the best out of Kinski. Kinski got the best out of Herzog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
think it's interesting also with the relationships between not only the actors and the directors, but the actors with each other. And you look at some classic examples like for example, Jaws. The actors there, they would actually just screw with each other off camera, and they would remain in character. And like Robert Shaw would just antagonize Richard Dreyfuss so much when they were off camera, and Richard Dreyfuss would give it back to him. And it's kind of interesting how you have, like, in a situation like that where there's this perfect mix of actors almost going crazy off camera, that creates this perfect blend. But then again, as you were saying, Clark, is that it can get really dangerous too. Like it can become something where actors or the crew does walk off, and that it's just ridiculous. And I mean, as we were saying, you take someone like Herzog to work with someone like Kinski. So I think that's it's quite a special experience.
Yeah.
So I guess we can move on to part B, which is we actually kind of already touched on this as well. But what are some of the dangers of over rehearsing? And I mentioned that before, that you can really run the dialogue dry, essentially, where you you lose all meaning in it, because you've said it so many times.
Yeah, there's no question. I think there's different ways to do. That's why it's art. That's why this is interesting, is that you can have somebody on the far end. So you mentioned Kubrick, but somebody who's alive and working today, David Fincher, is somebody who will do 150 takes of something. And then there are people like Herzog and other directors who are like, three takes most, maybe. There are people who will rehearse for 6 months before they shoot something, and then there are people who I don't even want to see my actors until we get on set and we're in front of camera and we're rolling. So again, that's what makes this so wonderful, is that you get to figure out what works for you and what works for the story and what works for the people you're working with. But I think for myself, speaking from my experience, I mean, I know that when I think that what's most interesting for me is to see real behavior happening in the moment. I am not so much interested in seeing a planned performance of something in general. And I think that rehearsing over and over and over again almost inevitably leads to a very planned and canned situation.
Right.
And I think that I think it's clear that you can rehearse in a way that maintains a spontaneity and an authenticity, but I think it's challenging. Clearly different projects require different stuff. I mean, if you're doing some crazy special effects movie and you've got to, every single moment has to be perfectly choreographed, clearly you've got to rehearse that. I think that's probably why we don't usually point to big special effects films and say, look at that extraordinary acting, though, you know.
Yeah.
Because the focus is on something different. I'm a person who doesn't like to rehearse. I don't want my actors to do, you know, any rote memorization. I always tell people I work with, no rote memorization, and I don't do it myself ever, ever, ever. I think the more times an actor says their lines out loud or reads them over and over again, I think you devastate your performance, personally. Yeah.
I agree. And I also don't like rules of filmmaking, if that makes sense. Like, I don't like, I mean, not as in set rules of, you know, like the basic things like no cell phones or anything, but I mean in terms of, like, I don't like it when somebody says, well, you have to do at least 3 takes to get it done, or you can't do more than 8 takes. I don't like that. I find that if you do that, you set a precedent for yourself that just ends up being lazy.
Yeah.
I find that if I'm filming something and I get it right on the first take, I'll maybe do a second take just for safety.
Right.
If the first take is great, then I'm happy with that. And then on the contrary, if I'm doing something and I don't get it after 8 takes, I'm going to keep going until I get it. And I never understand this whole, this ideology when people are like, oh no, I only do this amount of takes. Not necessarily, not that I'm bashing Herzog or anything. I think Herzog's good enough at it to know what he wants. But I mean, in terms of, like, I've been working with so many friends who are also into film and stuff, and they'll do something and it'll be really great. And then they say, well, like, we still have to get another take or another 2 takes anyway. And then they'll take another 2 takes, and then they'll end up using those because they'll say, well, you know, they did it more than once, and practice makes perfect. So therefore, these second and third takes are automatically better. But if you just watch the take, you can tell that the first take was the best one.
Yeah.
So I've never really understood that. And actually, F. Sickles brought up a really interesting point here too. And I mentioned that he said that he always wears a suit when directing, but acts casually. $1,000 suit makes people listen, but the laid back attitude keeps them comfortable. And I mentioned that there's actually there's this really interesting article that was done by TIFF on the TIFF website about, like, the whole attire of directors and what directors should wear, and like how different directors you know, dress for different occasions. But yeah, I think that $1,000 suits do, I'm sure, make you a little bit more presentable than everyone else on the set.
It certainly sets you apart. But yeah, I think, you know, Cullen, you spoke to something I think I'll put a word to, which is being dogmatic. What you described was, and I think you don't ever want to get to a place where you're dogmatic in your approach. I mean, there may be exercises that you can do, which was, you know, kind of the fun thing. What was the film that what's his name? Lars something with the obstructions. Yeah, Lars von Trier with the obstructions, and that, you know, you can do some fun things being dogmatic in exercises to kind of push you outside of your boundaries of how you work. And I think that can be really interesting. But yeah, I mean, why be dogmatic? Doesn't seem to make any sense. And I don't ever get the impression that Herzog is either. I mean, you got to remember, he's trying to speak very concisely in very small kind of soundbitey 10-minute videos to get you to think about your approach to filmmaking.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure that, you know, I don't want to speak for him, put words in his mouth, but I'm pretty sure that he would do whatever the hell it took to get the right thing on for it. And if it meant 50 takes, he'd probably, you know, I mean, I think he probably doesn't need 50 takes. But you know what I mean? He would do whatever it took. You know.
Yeah, and I think that like that whole dogmatic thing also is that we mentioned this last week in the last week's stream, where you can do film for exercise as well. And because there was a question that was brought up about somebody said that they're running behind on the thing, and then they're worried that they might not finish their intensive. And I remember I mentioned that even if you don't finish your intensive, you're still learning.
Yeah.
And you're still, I mean, every time you make something, you're learning something new about whether it's a technique, whether it's a new camera movement or a way to hold the camera or something like that. Like, you learn every time you make. So even if you don't finish your intensive, or even if you're making something else, if you're making a short film that's just for fun, and then you never end up getting around to finishing it, it's still valuable because
you learn something from that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would say too, you know, speaking for myself again, you know, I just finished a week ago, the assignment 5. I finally got, and boy, it's been taking me so much longer to do these assignments than the like recommended time frame. But I just did number 5. But I think one of the best things, always make film, keep making films, keep making films, keep making films, because probably the number one thing that you're going to move away from is inertia, is sitting on your ass and not making films. If you're making films, you're not sitting on your ass not making films. And that's probably the number one problem that all of us struggle with, is procrastination. I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I bet a lot of people, keep making films, man. And then the next one is easier, and the next one is easier. And the next thing you know, you're making films all the time, and you're not sitting around thinking about making films. You're making them.
Exactly, yeah. So because we have about 15 minutes left, we'll go into the assignment review, actually. Pretty good segue here.
Hey, one last quick thing.
Oh, yeah.
F. Sickles has a really cool, a reminder of this anecdote about Herzog eating the chocolate in front of Kinski, which I think is just a really cool anecdote of how each actor, about how your relationship with each and every person on the set, crew or cast, is going to be individual and specific.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to really, and there's no one thing that you can just apply dogmatically to anybody. And even these weird esoteric things like eating chocolate in front of Kinski, Herzog knew him well enough to know that would work. And I think that the moral of that story is that you've got to open yourself up as a director to everybody you work with, because that's the only way that you can really get to know their hearts, is for you to allow them to get to know yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know if any of you guys have ever been an actor, I'm sure you've worked with directors who were afraid to work with actors, didn't understand how to work with actors, who were much more focused on the camera and the framing. And they basically glorified DPs. We live in a world, even at the highest level, of directors who were basically glorified DPs.
Yeah. Well, that's what I always describe. Like, I remember back when I was little, I always said I wanted to be a director, and then my mom said, well, why don't you just go be like a cinematographer or something? And I think that's because a lot of people don't really see the difference. A lot of times people are like, oh, well, a director is just a person that makes the decisions of the cinematographer, but that's totally wrong. The director is the person who takes what the cinematographer says, takes what the actor says, takes what the lighting technician says, and puts them all together and makes a movie. That's what the director is. It's not, and that, I think that you made a really good point there about, a lot of times they are just glorified DPs. They don't know how to work with actors, and that can make a huge mess. But when a true director is the person who knows how to tie them all up and put a bow on top and then present this thing to you. So we'll move on to the assignment review. I don't know how far either of you guys are. I actually kind of broke the order of it. So right now we're doing wrapping up shooting and the approach to editing, whereas I kind of flipped that. The way I usually work is and the way I did it this time is I filmed the first week, and then this week I spent editing.
Mm-hmm.
And then once my first edit of the movie was done, I realized what I needed, and I realized I was going to do reshoots or rewrites or whatever, and then I go back, and so I'm planning on spending this coming week, kind of getting my reshoots done. But I don't know what you guys are, how you guys are doing on that. But you guys.
Well, can I ask you a question, just real quick? I'm curious if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing your experience with what drove you to do reshoots. Tell me about your situation, your experience where you got together with your footage, you got into editing. Tell me about how that went.
Well, basically, I'll give you the premise of my thing is just that there's it's actually funny that you bring up David Fincher, because it's kind of not based on, but thematically it's very similar to his movie Zodiac. And it's basically just about a guy who's out jogging, and then this black car starts following him, and then the next day the black car's outside of his house, and then his house is basically invaded by this mysterious guy, and he doesn't know what he wants. And the reshoots basically came from one, it's supposed to be a thriller, and I found that when I was watching it on the most basic level, it wasn't scary enough.
Okay.
And so I have a sheet right here of just like things that I want to reshoot or ideas for making it scary. But I also found I needed some shots I just didn't like the look of. And then there were also on a more sort of grand scale, I did a rewrite, and I decided to extend it because right now it all takes place just during the late afternoon. And I thought, well, why don't I make it kind of bring it up, and it brings back to that raising the stakes thing. Well, why don't I wait and then film the third kind of section of it at night? So that way it raises the stakes, because naturally night is a little bit creepier than mid-afternoon.
Yeah.
But also it just kind of makes it all the scarier that whoever this person that's following the main character is, not only has he found him twice, but now he's found him 3 times, which I thought was a little bit creepier. So
and it deepens his obsession, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I was just interested because I think that's kind of a really important kind of, you know, a teachable moment for all of us when you get done with your principal photography and you get into editing and you realize, oh my gosh, you know, I don't have this and I need it, or this is, you know, those are good teachable moments to try to learn how to be more efficient in your or you know, visualize or have a more concrete vision, whatever it is you want to kind of call it, or also I guess maybe on the flip side, to be more flexible, you know, and to realize when you do need to shoot. Yeah, I am going to use I am currently not shooting anything for this, but I just finished my assignment 5. So so I can kind of speak to my, and I've shot other, like maybe half a dozen short films and a couple documentary films. So I can kind of pull from that. But anyway, so that's kind of where I am. I just got done doing assignment 5, so I can kind of speak to that.
Okay, yeah. Which one, remind me again, which one is assignment 5? What's the
so assignment 5 was, so it's a short film like this, but there's some more strict parameters. So it's you from beginning to end, from shoot to edit, and you know, final cut, you've got 10 hours.
Oh yes, okay, I remember, yeah.
And it's got to have a chase in it, and it's got 1 character, 2 actors, so that kind of thing. Yeah, now I've got to go back and look at the question. What was the question? Did you reshoot or shoot any B-roll? You know, I didn't on mine, and I get that's the nature of the 10-hour thing. I mean, I just went in and I shot, and I went back to edit, and I made whatever the hell I could with what I shot. And it was really hard,
which I think is kind of fun, also.
No,
it was like a good exercise.
Oh well, it was a blast, and also you can only use a smartphone.
Oh yes, yeah.
So that was a whole different experience. I mean, I couldn't have any sound because sound we use in an iPhone microphone just sucks. So I have there's no live sound at all. And I didn't have time to do any ADR. I certainly didn't have time to do, you know, Foley work or sound effect stuff.
Yeah.
So it's super limiting, man. But yeah, I mean, it was really cool. You know, and I've been thinking back, and you know, in all of my experience, I have never gone back and done a reshoot.
Oh, really? Wow.
So to try to get specific to this question, I was just thinking back, you know, on none of my short films that I've ever done, and certainly not a documentary, because I just, you know, I couldn't go back to where I was to do it. I have never, ever had a reshoot, which does not mean that my stuff is so good. No, it's not that everything was perfect and wonderful. That couldn't be further from the case. But it's interesting. I guess I have not really thought about this in myself, that I guess when I get into editing, I'm like, okay, well, I'll make the best with what I've got. I should probably really look at that. There's probably a lot of places where I could have made something a lot better had I reshot some things. Interesting, yeah.
So what about you, Alex? How's yours going?
It's going all right. I'm actually working on a documentary short idea. Yeah, I kind of, you know, went in a little bit different direction, just because it was something that was a perfect kind of subject at the time. It's centering, I'm trying to follow this idea, and I'm kind of, you know, still working through it. I need to shoot a lot more and reshoot a few things, but and I'm not going to get into the, you know, 100 hours of footage. I just don't really have much footage at all at the current. But I'm getting into this idea of giving up. Like, what in your life have you given up? And it's trying to take it from the angle of, like, you know, of differentiating between like quitting and giving up. You know, when you give up on something, it's something that you at one point in your life really tried to get good at. And this past March, you know, just to differentiate from quitting, like, you know, you quit smoking, quit drinking, whatever, but you didn't ever really try to get that good at drinking, I hope. But my idea was, so this last March, I gave up doing sketch comedy. I did comedy for actively monthly shows, weekly shows for about 12 years almost.
Oh, wow.
Since I first moved to LA, I am mostly sketch comedy, some stand-up, some improv, but mostly centering around sketch comedy. And I was always a part of a team, always part of a troupe, always working, always trying to kind of push this boulder up the hill. And I just got to a point where I wasn't getting much out of it. And this past March, I retired with the team that I was working on, and we kind of called it quits and decided that, this wasn't something that we all needed to do. And strangely enough, this past Saturday, or yesterday, we had a little reunion show, and it had been, 6 months since we had done anything. And it was kind of a test of did I give up, right? Like, did I do the right thing? Should I have given this up? And that's kind of, with speaking to a lot of other creatives, who, people on the team, people outside of it, people that, I work with in filmmaking, and just kind of finding out when have they given up and what have they given up and did they stick with it? And that's kind of the overarching theme of do you ever really give up on something if you tried so hard at it in the first place? And how do you know that you did the right thing unless you at some point come back to it and kind of, dip your toe back in the pool? So that's just this kind of first person, what's the Sherman's March style documentary of just kind of going into it and trying to get as personal as possible, which is difficult in and of itself because you're revealing a lot.
Well, yeah, I think one of the best things that people can do for themselves is actually learn something and then give it up for a while.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I find that that's the way that you almost find out what you didn't learn.
Yeah.
And so you'll go away from it for a while, and then you'll go back to it, and you'll go, "Oh, I didn't even realize that that's the thing that I could do." So yeah, I think that's it's actually a really healthy thing to do.
You get so into it and you get so focused on it that you forget that why you even liked it to some degree, and you stop progressing. You just kind of just keep marching.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit tangential, but Alex, I just want to say that really hits home, close to home for me, because I kind of pursued acting exclusively for a long time, and I've definitely had those exact same kind of thoughts and situations and things. Yeah, it's definitely some soul searching, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
It's a good subject for a film.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is.
Thanks.
So just before we get into just the last section there, I'm just going to ask anyone in the chat if you guys have any questions or last minute comments, just put them in now, and then we'll read them all at the end once we're done the final thing, and then we'll wrap up in about 5-10 minutes. Okay. But yeah, so we'll get into a little bit of editing right now. I don't know if either of you have begun it, or I guess
I have.
That you have started, and Alex, I guess you can just talk about editing in general, how you edit, or but I've already spoken about my approach. Is usually I make a first draft, and then I find out what I need, and then I go back. Clark, do you want to talk about what your editing standard is?
Yeah, sure. So it really varies. If I'm making a narrative film, a fiction film, when I go into the shooting of it, I have an extremely in my mind, I can see the film. By the time I've gone from the conceptualization of it to the writing of it to the editing of it, then to creating it. I don't do storyboards, but I do sometimes do shot lists for myself to work with who's ever going to be operating camera if it's not me, and then through the shooting of it. So I've got a very, very strong vision. So it's different when I sit down to edit. Then it's really about fulfilling that vision. And I think, am I gone? Are we here?
No, you're still here.
And then it's about fulfilling that vision. And what I've got to kind of be careful about is not.
I hear you. You're breaking up a little bit, but.
Okay, hold on. Am I still?
Yep. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So it's about fulfilling that vision, but also trying to be careful to make sure that I'm able to let all this goodness come into it that I didn't pre-plan, right? So I try to let the performances and the things, that the accidents, let's say, that I took advantage of when I was filming, whatever happened, I try to give flexibility for that to come in. But when I do documentary stuff, it's very much about, I sit down with the footage and I just absorb. I just absorb footage. I absorb it. A lot of times I'll watch, which can be tough if there's a lot of it, where I just watch it and absorb it, and I watch it and absorb it, and then it's hard for me to explain. And some of this does happen too a little bit on the narrative stuff. It just starts to, the pieces just tell me where they want to go. They just come into it, and it's almost like when I'm really in a flow, it's like they just tell me where they want. It's like music, and there's a rhythm that becomes apparent, and there's a dynamic nature or arc that just seems to, it just informs me. I don't know, it's hard to explain.
Yeah, well, it's like that Herzog's movie on the first Gulf War, his documentary about that, and in the class, the one lesson, he was talking about that shot where it went over the fire.
Yeah,
I think we lost Alex, but maybe his connection went out.
Yeah,
but that shot that went over the fire and then flips upside down. Yeah, I feel like that's something that during editing, that if you're making something like a documentary, and I don't have much experience. I've made one or two of them, but I'm not that in depth really to be talking about it. But that's something that I always found, that, like you were saying, I watch all the footage and then I see what sticks out and what has the most kind of profound emotional impact on me, and then that's what I'll use. And I feel like that's almost what happened with Herzog and that shot of the fire.
Yeah,
that he was just sitting there watching all this footage, and then he saw that and went, well, I have to put that somewhere, because it's such a long shot, but it's so mesmerizing.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's really, I think you're right. You spoke to it. It's ultimately, I feel like what you yourself are impacted by emotionally is what you've got to put in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
so I'll just read off the last couple of things. F. Sickles said, he said that he quit. I guess you quit film, or he quit theater acting after, and now he's in film acting, but he can't remember why he liked theater acting. And he says that he liked what Werner said about treating it like it's found footage, which I think, that's one of the kind of the buzz phrases of this whole masterclass, is when he says that we're explorers and we go out and we. Oh, Alex is back. Hello, Alex. Are you there?
Hey, buddy.
Everything went to hell for me.
That's all right. Same with
there
me.
we go.
But yeah, that's one of the kind of key phrases that this masterclass has stuck out, is that where he says, like, it's, don't treat the footage like you took it when you're making a documentary, or even this applies to feature as well, or short films. Treat it like you've just found it, and like, what's the best possible way for you to present what you've just found to an audience. And I think that's something that's really interesting that Werner kind of brings up a lot.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So Alex, do you want to say anything else on editing, just for this last little bit?
No, I don't know where my approach is yet, because I know I need to shoot more. I know that I've looked at it just a little bit, and I know that I need more before I find 100%, where everything's going to go. And I don't want to get locked into anything until I feel like I have enough, which is, just kind of this process is a little bit different, because it's an event. The documentary is an event, and it's also kind of like a very personal journey. So I'm trying to do both at the same time. So I'm still looking for that when I feel like I have enough. So
yeah. All right, great. And then F. Sickles, he said another pretty great thing, which is, in editing, it is basically found, or it basically is found, which is a good point that you have to find. You essentially have to, you go through all the footage you shot and you find the kind of gemstones. But this hour really did go by quite. I guess it's more an hour and 10 minutes at this point. But so I think we'll probably end it there.
All right.
It's been fun, and hope to see you all guys next week. Let me just make sure we covered everything quickly. Yeah,
I think we did.
We got everything. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me here, and thanks to everyone who watched. Hillary will be back next week to moderate the whole thing. But yeah, it's been fun. So
it's been fun. All right. Well, nice meeting you two, and everybody else. Hi, bye. Hope you enjoyed, and happy shooting, everybody.
Yeah. Good luck with everyone's projects. All right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop the broadcast now.
All right.